Hello, I'm Stacy Graham with Teaching Primary Sources Southern Region at Middle Tennessee State University. And here's our next webinar in our series of trying to help you find good primary sources and other resources on the Library of Congress website for use in the classroom or at your historic site or museum or organization. So this episode is actually geared a little bit more towards classroom teachers, and we're going to be looking at how you can find primary sources that are actually created during the time period that you're trying to teach. So before we get started with that, though, I do want to share with you my screen so I can show you where you can find these on our newly redesigned website. So this is what the new relaunch of our website looks like. The URL is the same, but if you scroll down to professional development, the webinars are going to be accessible through this page, and there's also a link to where you can find that playlist on our YouTube channel. All right, so I want to tell you about the first, about an experience that I had when I was creating a primary source set many, many years ago on the Founding Fathers. And so I'm actually going to show you that primary source set and where you can find it on our new website. So if you go down to Resources and Tools, and then you scroll down to where it says Primary Source Sets, then you'll see kind of all of the materials that we've created. And under this tab, we have Founding Documents. So Patrick Henry is the case study that I'm going to be examining during this episode. So Patrick Henry gave his famous Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech in 1775, and I was trying to find a primary source for it. But you will notice that, let's take a look at what it is that I found. This image right here, a wonderful image, very dramatic, something I think students would have a fun time looking at, was actually not created during 1775. This is from 1876, so 100 years later, done by Courier and Ives, a very famous printmaking company in the United States. So this is actually a primary source for how the Founding Fathers are remembered during the first centennial of the U.S., and not for the actual scene itself. What about the text of the speech? Of course, the text of this speech can be considered a primary source, but it wasn't written down until decades later based on the memories of people who were present. And then, of course, this page here at the Avalon Project at Yale is a modern transcription of an older edition. So while the text is a primary source, it's still not maybe exactly capturing what happened in 1775. And then we have, ooh, a sound recording. Now, I think that your students are savvy enough to know that there would not have been a sound recording in 1775. So, of course, when you scroll down to the date that this was created, you can see 1913 is the recording date. And so this is somebody reading his speech in the early 20th century. So this is more a primary source for the growing technology of sound recording equipment, and again, how it was remembered in time. So we haven't really gotten to a primary source yet. So let's say we wanted to go to the Library of Congress homepage and search for Patrick Henry. What would we find there? Well, if you're looking at it in list view, you can see the dates as well as the thumbnails. And just looking at the dates, of course, a lot of these people aren't the Patrick Henry. You see that there isn't anything from the 18th century until you get to some manuscript pages. So let's say we filtered out by date along the left-hand column and just looked at the results from the 18th century. And now we're getting into some really good primary sources. These are letters from the Thomas Jefferson collection, many of them written by Jefferson to Patrick Henry, and some of them written by Patrick Henry to Thomas Jefferson. So let's take a look at that. So we have here an example of Patrick Henry's own handwriting in a letter to Thomas Jefferson from 1777. And so this is something that you could use as a primary source. Now, students might be frustrated because it's not easy to read. And even if it were easy to read, it is text, which to them is less exciting than images. So how can we find an image for them? Well, you're not going to have a lot of luck, kids, but you can filter out under original format. There are a few results under photo, print, and drawing. So if you look at what those are, you can see, all right, well, this third one is a strange hit, and I don't think it has anything to do with the Patrick Henry of American history. But of course, we have the famous print of the Boston Massacre, which happened 5 years before Henry's speech. So this just mentions Patrick Henry and is not necessarily an image of him. So let's look at the first one. It's another text. Students are going to be disappointed, but it's actually a really, really exciting text because this is written from the British points of view, and they're raising a hue and cry, as you can see from the third line there, about actions that Patrick Henry is taking that are kind of subverting British authority. And here we have kind of actions that lead towards the revolution. And here they are talking about how he is taking up arms. They're putting themselves in a posture of war. They're exciting the people to join in outrageous and rebellious practices to the great terror of all His Majesty's faithful subjects and in open defiance of law and government. So you have a lot of exciting language that's describing the impact of Patrick Henry's actions leading up to the American Revolution. And so even though this isn't an image of Patrick Henry, it is a very good primary source to use when you're talking about his actions during that time period. So let's go back to what if you just want to find an image of Patrick Henry and we take off the date range? What's this first one that pops up here? Well, the date is between 1900 and 1920. But if you look closely, this is a picture of a picture. So the picture that's being depicted is actually older than the 20th century. It's just being copied in the 20th century because of the advances of photographic technology and people wanting to do that and make facsimiles. And so it's possible that this is an older image of him, but we don't have a date for that. What about this one? This looks kind of old. So there is no date on it, but it's an engraving from a painting made after a miniature, etc. So it's actually kind of a chain of copies of what would have been an original. And again, we're not sure when that originally would have been made, possibly in the 18th century, but possibly later, because he was more famous after these events, then images would have been made of his likeness. And so you may just have to let go of the idea of having pictures of people during the time period in which they were becoming famous. This one is my favorite, though. This is a copy of the painting that actually comes up when you look him up in Wikipedia. This is based on a painting, so it would have been, of course, in color. The photograph is what makes it black and white. But even this painting was created by a painter who wasn't even born until the 1830s. And so he may have been copying it off of earlier likenesses, but he's probably basing it on, his own imagination or just kind of like lesser exemplars. And so trying to find images from those earlier time periods is not necessarily the way to always find primary sources. And so another way to get primary sources, if you can't find the images that you want, are of course pages of text that you can use as images. Maps is one of my favorite things to use, or you can find modern day photographs of buildings that were created and were there at the time that are still there today. So modern images of architecture from the 18th century are a great primary source that you can use with your students. And so those are just a few tips. And I'm going to close out this episode because we're running out of time. But I hope that you'll join me in the next episode. And in the meantime, let us know if you have any questions. You can reach me at our Contact Us page on our website. Thanks.